All right, I'd like to introduce Pratik. But thank you, Pratik, for joining today. And sitting there, I saw you join the room. Good to see you, my friend. How are you doing?
Doing good, Mark. Yeah, nice to see you again. Thanks for having me.
Oh, of course, always a pleasure. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll jump into talking about today's in this segment's topic.
Sure, certainly. So I've been in the product security space for quite some time. Most recently, I've been overseeing the product security and the GRC program at a tech firm. That's my most recent experience. But I've been working in the technology industry in the private sector for a number of years. My experience goes back a decade and a half. I started my career in academia, was in the Midwest, and then moved to the West Coast and have been in California for the past 11 years. Yeah, I mean, based out of the Bay Area, and yeah, just like engaging with folks in the security community, have been part of a number of different groups, active working groups. I mean, have been focused on a lot of participation and contribution actually with various groups. So yeah, happy to be.
And you're very active in the Purple Book community as well as we're building this maturity model right now, working very closely with Mark, who'll be coming on next, actually. So you can probably say hi to Mark in there as we're transitioning. Talking about the people part of application security maturity. So in this session, we're talking about exactly like what are the key components that make up a modern application security program. And as you've been working with your organizations that you've been part of, kind of what do you see as some of the key areas that you focus on when you're trying to mature an organization? What are the top three areas that you would view as defining your level of maturity?
That's a very good question, Mark. I think the top three, the ones that come to my mind are, one thing I would definitely want to focus on is, I mean, testing out the various applications. So depending on the size of the organization, depending on the setup, depending on how many they actually like, if it's a small company or if it's just one product or if they have multiple different applications, you want to make sure, I mean, you have everything tested clearly. And this is not just for like internal applications. I would even factor in third-party stuff, things that actually are being brought in, that are being onboarded, because that is also introducing risk. Also, anything that you're assembling when it comes to assembly with open source components, because there's a heavy reliance with open source components across a lot of organizations that I've seen. So obviously that introduces open source risk. So you want to make sure there is coverage there, there's testing, extensive level of testing as much as possible, using various different techniques, factoring in both runtime as well as non-runtime environments. So that's one key area that I would definitely focus on. And if an organization has been able to achieve that, that also says something about their AppSec maturity. Another piece I would say is focusing on the coaching and the learning and the education, actually, especially focused on any kind of security education. So this doesn't just pertain to general security awareness training. In this case, actually, it focuses more on like creating building developers, coaching them to make sure they are able to influence things from a security perspective early on. Also identifying folks who are security minded and are interested and to make them your allies, to actually like create something like a security champions program to coach people actually with the right kind of stuff that actually is relevant and pertinent, because not everything is pertinent and relevant. Like even if when someone talks about the OWASP top 10, you could have your own prioritization of that actually could be different than what the top 10 actually gives you. I mean, you could have certain vulnerabilities that one would actually like to focus on depending on the environment that you're dealing with. So those are the ones that I mean, you need to actually like prioritize, you need to customize things, you need to make it more actionable and something that developers and the wider community in the organization can take home and actually like basically imbibe, absorb, and start implementing, I mean, as and when things come up. So definitely that's another key area. The third one that I can think of is around metrics. A lot of times actually tracking isn't done. Like even if you have certain things in place with testing and coaching and the security awareness piece, but then how is your program actually like functioning? Like, I mean, are you tracking where is good progress happening, where things are actually falling short? So you definitely want a good set of key metrics that are applicable, pertinent, that actually would help you to drive the program, that would allow you to reinvest in things or add more investment. bring in more capabilities, more resources, more tooling. So that's another key piece too. It's also kind of like an evolving game, because what you define initially as the kind of metrics that you would want to focus on actually may not be the only ones that you deal with. I mean, you may have to make changes. Maybe certain ones actually don't apply, or you feel that even if you collect numbers, I mean, or information pertaining to that, it may not still be like worth influencing a change or something. I mean, so it's a constantly evolving game, but definitely, I mean, investing in metrics early on, making it transparent and visible across the board, giving people the sense that, okay, these are the ones that you're collecting, and this is what you're looking at, and this is how you're driving the change and improving the security state. I think it's definitely key. It says something about the maturity of the AppSec program. So those are the three that I can think of, at least right off the top of my head.
Oh, that was a good off the top of your head. That was amazing. So yeah, you gave me a lot to unpack there, and I think you touched on security champions programs. Really, that's kind of like how we can help scale. You might not start off there, but ultimately you're going to need to get there as you get more and more involved. You also, I love what you said there about metrics at the end, where it's like, they evolve over time, because ultimately your first level of metric is just some level of visibility. Hey, what's going on? But then ultimately what you want to do is have improvement. So you need to have metrics that you can track to track towards a goal, towards an improvement target. And those increase in complexity as you mature. You don't start with, hey, we want our mean time to remediation to be within 24 hours. You don't start there if you don't have any tools in place, right? You have to get a handle. Ties to what we were talking about earlier about debt. It also ties to what Tanya did a great session about metrics as well. I think you were in that as well. I saw you during that session too. But one thing that I wanted to double click on a little further was the area you were talking about, doing the analysis and the testing of the applications you're developing. Obviously, the open source, that's where everybody starts. Everybody's very, very focused on, hey, what's my open source vulnerability or my risk from the embedding open source? But you also talked about external applications that you're bringing in and onboarding. And I think that's an area that people often forget about when you think about application security expanding beyond just the stuff that you're developing in-house, but it's the stuff you're either using as a COTS application or maybe as a dependency as part of the thing that you're building. But hey, everything's a service now, right? So you're embedding in a third-party service. What do you do within your organization to manage that risk and get some true assessment of that external factor?
That's a very good question, Mark. I'd say, I mean, a lot of times actually this is an area where a lot of the focus isn't actually paid. I mean, like people actually forget that this is actually a very important threat vector. I mean, so I look at it as another attack surface, another place where you could easily actually like include a security risk. If you're actually like having more than one third-party applications or platforms that you're dealing with, I mean, obviously the greater the worsening of the risk surface actually. In terms of, I mean, to your question, I mean, like for managing it, definitely, I mean, you want to vet things very thoroughly there. You want to make sure you ask the right questions, you get the right kind of information, you collect things, I mean, at an early stage. You want to make sure that your security function actually is also one of the gatekeepers, because a lot of times the decision making with getting a third-party application actually is done like behind the scenes with like few groups being involved, and then it just basically like it bypasses security review. So you want to make sure that security is actually heavily involved. Anything that is even starting to be considered actually has to go through a security discussion. And then, I mean, if the security team gives the green light for it, I mean, it should actually proceed. So there has to be a pre-onboarding vetting. And I would also say that, let's say, if you enter an organization where you already are, that is pretty much true in every case, that, I mean, you enter at a certain time, or you build a security team at a certain time, and you already have these third-party applications, which, let's say, may have not gone through a proper vetting, a security vetting. I mean, like, you also want to factor in post-onboarding vetting as well. So that, let's say, if there is anything egregious that you find, I mean, there has to be still some way to actually like put in some controls or processes in place to make sure if something gets popped or breached there, I mean, it doesn't actually like end up reflecting on your side. I mean, because a lot of times, I mean, that's a challenge that you face actually, that you already have stuff that's been onboarded by someone, or by a certain group or something in the past, and now you're just dealing with all those legacy applications that already are, and they are working actually. I mean, so you have to obviously still factor in the post onboarding vetting. So yeah, those are the key things I would say.
Yeah, and I often when I really do view that this is an area which is growing in importance, because we're all leveraging SaaS solutions. Our data is going out of our organization and being managed by a third party. And guess what? That third party software isn't the same software it was 6 months ago. It's we're past the world where we just deploy something on premise. We have complete control of the ecosystem. That's no longer cost effective. So we're going to buy a subscription-based service. Do they have like the next 0-day event? And this is the only time we'll say log4j today, I promise. But this is, like when the next one happens, how do you know where it is in your external applications? You can look in your internal developers, you have access, but if you don't have an SBOM, if you're not doing constant analysis of that, because when a 0-day happens, you know where they are. And then, the more mature organizations that I deal with are also doing, they're doing DAST and pen testing against a service before it's onboarded, before it's approved, depending upon the risk to the business, right? If it's going to have access to critical IP, I want to know that that thing over there is fully protected.
Exactly. Yeah, very much so. Yeah. I mean, that's very true. I mean, yeah, I mean, getting that kind of visibility, having at least, I mean, like things in place or some kind of testing done actually at that stage, whatever stage you are. I mean, let's say if you're told today, about something that, okay, you just entered an environment and this is what now you're facing, actually, you need to start right away. Obviously, you can actually like propose that, okay, I mean, down the line, this process has to change. It has to be something that has to be happen. I mean, like before something is onboarded, because once you onboard, you're already bringing in that risk. I mean, so the ideal situation would be that the vetting and the review and everything actually takes place prior to getting something onboarded. But even let's say, as you said, I mean, like even if something gets onboarded, let's say the product actually may have been in a different state at that time, and you vet it and it passes through your security check. But then things can change even on their end. I mean, and so you have to have a sort of a continuous process. I mean, you have to still do the due diligence even after the onboarding, even if it's your own decision actually that you've taken with onboarding it. You still have to, you can't just like let it go, I mean, and focus on other things, because I mean, there's going to be a change in the security state of things as the product changes. And so you have to factor in even post onboarding vetting as well.
Yeah, and then you have to manage that whole process of communicating with the third party as well.
Exactly.
So if you can believe it, that was 15 minutes. So yeah, thank you very much. And I can see that Mark and Robert have also joined us as well today. So thank you, Pratik. And you might want to say hi to Mark, since both of you have been working on the people part of the AppSec model. Yeah, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark.